Hey, this is former Blue Devil lineman Matt Skura. You're listening to Basketball Conference, the ACC football podcast. Go Duke, go ACC.
Welcome back in Basketball Conference, the ACC football podcast. It is 8/13, August the 13th. We are moving along through season previews. It's time to preview the 2024 North Carolina Tar Heels. Rodd Baxley, we can call you friend of the show. Second time on here. You mentioned this before we hit record, doing the do-si-do. Last year you recorded with just Joey. This year now you're recording with just me. We just met each other formally for the first time about 2.5 minutes ago. And now we're sitting here recording a podcast. You're with the Fayetteville Observer covering UNC, North Carolina, NC State. But, of course, today we are going to be talking about the Tar Heels. First of all, how are you? Welcome back to the pod.
Good, man. Good to be back. Good to meet the full team now. So
yeah.
We're all squared away, man. 100% on the dial.
Yeah, I mean, next time we have you on, hopefully we'll be able to do like a full podcast.
Full group.
Exactly. So North Carolina, really interesting team. Obviously, we're entering a 2024 season where – you went from Sam Howell, which, great quarterback play, to then Drake May, continued great quarterback play over the last couple seasons. And now Mack Brown is entering this season not really knowing what's going on at quarterback. I saw stuff posted by different outlets talking about Mack Brown saying, hey, we're still trying to figure out who the starting quarterback is. That was a couple days ago. I mean, this is kind of the first time in a while that North Carolina has entered the season with not a ton of gigantic expectations as far as the ACC goes, but also I think Mack Brown has done some of his best work, at least in his second stint here at North Carolina, when the team has flown a little bit under the radar.
Yeah, I mean, going back to Mack's first season, I mean, he's had an elite quarterback every year. I mean, he had Sam Howell in 2019, so for the first time since Mack's first year back, we're having a real quarterback controversy. But as you said, there's been no sleeping giant talk in the preseason, no hype in the polls. So it's there for the taking, especially with the schedule the Tar Heels have. So we'll see if they can take advantage of it and kind of right the ship after the poor finishes the last few years.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of it will hinge on what they have coming back at quarterback. I mean, we'll get into the defense. Obviously, it's been a big talking point the last couple years, but quarterback, I mean, they bring in Max Johnson from LSU. He's been around a bit now, and he's seen a lot, and he's played some. So, I mean, you're bringing some starting experience in. You have him. You got Connor Harrell. Like, what's the quarterback room looking like? I know we're still kind of in the middle of fall camp. Mac himself is saying, hey, we're still trying to figure out what we're going to look like week one. But how is this shaking out, at least through, I guess, the midway point in camp as we sit here and hit record today?
Yeah, right now, Mike, it's a coin flip, man. I mean, Mack has been pretty open about it throughout camp. He said he feels really good about all three of their quarterbacks, throwing Arkansas transfer Jacoby Criswell in there, who they brought in after the spring, which, can kind of say a lot about what you had during the spring, too.
Yeah, right.
But I would say right now, you probably have to give the edge to Max Johnson. I mean, you went out and got him in the portal. He's played in the SEC. You probably want to give the veteran a shot out of the gate. And if it's a poor start, then you tried. And you can, kind of mix and match these guys as we go along. I do not think this is going to be a situation in which we have somebody starting the full course of a season. So who knows what we're going to have after week one. But I think coming out of the gate, you're probably going to see Max Johnson being the veteran that he is. Give him a shot. You went out and got him in the portal. And see what he can do at Minnesota.
What do you think the chances are that we see multiple quarterbacks this year? Or do you think this is a situation where, hey, this is something that's a little bit jumbled in preseason camp, but because we've seen such consistency at quarterback for Carolina, I'm just curious if Mack would ever go. I mean, obviously he'd pull, whoever the starter is, he'd pull him for ineffectiveness, I'm sure. But what do you think the likelihood is that, whoever ends up being the starting quarterback heading into week one ends up being the quarterback for the entire season?
Yeah, I don't think it's a good shot, man, as far as that week one starter being the guy the rest of the year. But, I mean, Max talked about it a little bit. He's had success with two quarterbacks in the past. I mean, in his first stint here, they had a lot of mix and match and were still very good. I think they were top 10 program at one time doing that.
Right.
So he said it's not his plan to play two. He would prefer somebody separate themselves and take the job. But if you have to do it, he said he's going to do anything it takes to win a game. So if you have to play one guy and he has a poor start and you throw in another guy and he's better, you're just going to kind of ride the hot hand, which I think is what's going to be the main theme throughout the season probably.
We'll find out if this is, hey, if you have two quarterbacks, you have none, or if this is
exactly.
like Chris, or if this is like Chris Leak, Tim Tebow, which is like one of the few points in time where we can point to a quarterback situation like that actually working. A place where North Carolina is not going to have a lot of questions is the running back room.
Yeah.
Amari and Hampton back. You add in Darwin Barlow. You have Hood still, Caleb Hood. This is a running back room with experience, both at North Carolina and elsewhere, highlighted by Hampton, who's one of the best runners in the conference.
Yeah, I mean, we just got done with the Olympics, man. But if you go back to the ancient Greece, I think Amari and Hampton would fit right in, man, as a sculpture. Look at that guy. I mean, he's got tree trunk legs, chiseled out body, got like a 12-pack. I mean, this dude is ridiculous. Then you throw in the speed and power. I don't see many defenders who want to get in front of him. So that is one bright spot when you look at the offense. You've got a workhorse back there who's going to get it done if you can just open up a little bit of space for him. And then they really loved Barlow as a veteran coming in, who's played at TCU and Southern Cal. And then Caleb Hood, he's had success in the ACC, been injured a lot, so that's a knock against him. And even Davion Goss, I mean, Mac Brown's been praising him, man, as far as a special teams guy, which has been a big area of concern in recent years for them. And then, praising his pass protection and just protections in general. So I don't think they're going to have to worry about the running back room. They got some options there.
Receiving core, another area where I don't feel like they're going to have a lot of questions. 7 of the top 8 receivers are back from last year. You have J.J. Jones still in the fold, Nate McCollum. It's a veteran unit. You have Bryson Nesbitt at tight end, who's a good player. This is, I mean, a lot of pass catchers, a lot of weapons offensively for whoever the quarterback ends up being. It feels like this receiving room is right up there with the running back room as far as depth and talent.
Yeah, I mean, if you're Chip Lindsey, offensive coordinator, just find ways to get these guys the ball. Simplest scenarios possible. Get them out in space because the weapons are there. It's like you said, man. You got Bryson Nesbitt, who's got a NFL caliber tight end build. John Copenhaver kind of goes under the radar because he was hurt a lot last year, but still played. He's as steady a tight end as you'll find too. And then plenty of pass catchers. Take your pick. And they're really hyped about a freshman, Jordan Shipp, coming in. So there are plenty of weapons around the quarterbacks, but are you going to be able to get them the ball? That's the big question. Are you going to be able to take care of the ball? So we'll see. But the weapons are there to have another potent offense if they can get those playmakers out in space.
Offensive line, young-ish. I know that they bring in, there's going to be transfers coming in here, but guys that they've played a little bit elsewhere, but also guys who have played a lot elsewhere. So you got like kind of a healthy mix there. I feel like outside of quarterback, offensive line is probably the biggest question mark just because you have a lot of guys coming together who haven't played a lot of football together before.
Yeah, spot on, Mike. I mean, everybody's talking about the quarterback, but offensive line, you're replacing 4 or 5 starters, man. So it's not good when you talk about a game that's won in the trenches.
Yeah.
So Willie Lampkin, all ACC guy, he's back, but everything else is kind of mix and match. I mean, Austin Blasky out of Georgia, he'll probably be the starting center, so you got some steadiness there. But outside of that, man, I think they're going to try to rotate guys in, see if they can find the best mix. Mac has said he feels like it's the deepest they've been at the position as far as what they can do as a whole. But we're really not going to know anything until they play week 1 at Minnesota, and then we'll see.
I got to ask this question for Joey. I'm sure you'll remember, Joey is a Georgia Tech alum, so he has certain opinions about North Carolina's new defensive coordinator, Jeff Collins. How was that received in the North Carolina fan base? Because he has been a successful defensive coordinator before, obviously had a good stint as a head coach at Temple. Georgia Tech didn't work out for a variety of reasons, but I feel like they're getting a good veteran coach into the fold here that is a little bit younger. Hopefully it works a little bit better than the Gene Chizik situation, which I know Mac had really high hopes for, didn't quite work out. kind of new blood in the room. How is his scheme going to look, number one? And number two, like, how are the fans feeling about the hire, moving on from Chizik and bringing Collins in?
Yeah, man, if you look at the message boards the last few years, when things went wrong, one of the top threads was about Gene Chizik.
Yeah.
I mean, no knock against him, national champion, proven coach.
Right.
But there was just kind of a stalemate within that after a few years, and things clearly weren't getting better. And Mac has talked about improving the depth. That's what's really got to change for them. They've got to get deeper. You got guys playing 800, 900 snaps. It's not sustainable toward the end of the year when they've went on these long losing streaks. But Jeff Collins has brought a different energy to this group, man. I mean, talking to the guys, I mean, they call him, the Minister of Mayhem, and he's kind of lived up to that title so far. I mean, this guy's as energetic as they come in practice, man, and just giving this unit some juice after it's kind of been, rock steady with Gene. He's more of a, here's what we're going to do. We're not going to get too rah-rah about it. But Jeff Collins is kind of the complete opposite. All about aggression, pressure, get opportunities for takeaways. And on that side of the ball, that's where most of the talent is for Carolina as far as returners. So as bad as the defense has been the past few years, you got to feel good about what they have coming back for the first time in a while and see what they can do under Collins, who, like we've said, is a proven defensive coordinator. He had really good stops in the SEC. So you got to think it's going to get better for Carolina. I mean, heck, it couldn't get worse after the last few years.
It's really intriguing because I do think Collins can still coach. It's one of those situations where I think Georgia Tech is a very tough school to recruit to. Joey's talked about on this podcast before, as far as their academics, and Joey calls it's academically narrow in terms of there's only so many subjects, right? I mean, it's hard for kids to get into school there and stay in school there, but it's also hard to bring kids in just because of how the academics are laid out. Georgia Tech is an engineering school. He's brought up a lot of good points about that in the past. I feel like that's a really tough first Power 5 head coaching job too, and there are a lot of things I know Jeff Collins could have done better. Georgia Tech fans, they were also excited about the energy that Collins brought initially, and then I think the fan base saw the losses pile up and then didn't think he was being authentic, which I don't know. We'll see. I think this is a good hire for North Carolina's defense only because I think the arrow can only point up. I'm with you there, and I think Collins, different voice, different energy. The defensive aggression, I think, is going to look different. And now as we get into the personnel, really solid group up front. Linebacking core is experienced but lacking depth, and they got a ton back in the secondary.
Yeah.
So, yes, a bad defense a year ago. Can you be a mediocre defense this year? And I feel like if you can get to that point with the skill talent that Carolina has on offense, this is where I think Mac Brown, like I mentioned earlier, kind of does his best work with a team that's flying under the radar a little bit with talent that just needs to play to their potential. And I feel like Collins, with this group at all three levels, he's going to have an opportunity to get the most out of them.
Yeah, spot on, man. I mean, you look at the secondary is one of the major weaknesses the last few years, right? Now this year, I mean, they're stacked there. Their depth-wise is good. Elijah Huzzy and Marcus Allen are going to be two of the top corners in the ACC, you would think. Looking at the safeties, Jakeem Harris from NC State, Caleb Cost at the Star. DeAndre Boykins is back from an injury. So they've got some stars on that back end, but you touched on it there too with the linebackers. Power Eccles and Amari Campbell, who's already broke his hand in practice, according to reports. I think Inside Carolina was first on that one. They're looking for some guys in that linebacking core to step up so they don't have to play Power Eccles 1,000 snaps like they did last year. And then the defensive line's a story every year because, I mean, they've stacked 5-star recruits, 4-star recruits along that line in recent years who just haven't lived up to the hype. Now you got Kamen Rucker there, steady. Des Evans, steady. Bo Atkinson, steady. Kevin Hester. But they're really looking for Travis Shaw to make that next step. And if he does, watch out. You know, this unit can be really good.
You got the steadiness of the starters. You have the intrigue of guys that were really, really highly touted recruits, like you mentioned. If you start to round out a second group of pass rushers and rotating guys in there on the defensive line, you probably feel a little bit better about the linebacking core being thin if you can establish some depth on the defensive line. But I think that the question for me here is defensive line and linebacker depth. The starters are good, and I think the secondary is going to be pretty good. Maybe one of the surprise units in the ACC. I feel like North Carolina's defense as a whole is flying under the radar a little bit just because they were so bad last year. But they do have a lot of talent, no doubt, because Mac Brown's done such a great job recruiting to Carolina. But it's just getting the most out of that talent, which is something that has been a criticism of Mac Brown. So defensive line and linebacker, I think it's safe to say depth is the primary concern. Secondary, not so much.
Yeah, that you're spot on there, man. I mean, everything starts up front, so they've got to find some consistency there and find some depth. I mean, that's we go back to that, but that's been the biggest question in the last few years. I mean, they say they're going to play more guys, they haven't played more guys, and then you see it at the end of the year where they're getting smoked defensively down the stretch because they're gassed. So if you can build out that depth like they think they can this year, you can kind of flip some of those results in theory. So we'll see, man. It'll be intriguing, that's for sure.
Let's take a quick second to remind you about Section103.com. It is the internet's premier place for all things wonderful Georgia Tech apparel. They've got t-shirts, they've got sweatshirts, they've got hoodies, they've got a short sleeve coach hoodie if you want to look like Coach Key. They've got onesies for babies. They've got all things for any man, woman, children, something for the whole family, all the Georgia Tech fans in your life. They need something from Section103.com. Use promo code GOACC for 10% off your first order. You can go get t-shirts supporting NIL efforts with guys like Haynes King and Zach Pyron. They've got shirts supporting the basketball team, the baseball team, the volleyball team, all sorts of wonderful Tech traditions, all sorts of things. Again, any Georgia Tech fan in your life, they need something from Section103.com. Once again, use promo code GOACC for 10% off your first order. I particularly love the Feliz Bobby Dodd sweatshirts. We got Christmas season coming up before you know it. You're going to want one of those for your holiday party. Go get it all at Section103.com. Huge shout out to Steven and the gang. Thank you so much to them for their support of the Basketball Conference podcast. We would love it if you guys would go show your support for Section103.com as well. Now, back to the episode.
I don't feel like we've entered a year with Carolina in quite some time where there's been more questions about the offense than the defense.
Yeah.
I feel like that's where we're at now. I guess, we'll get into the specifics of the schedule here in a second, but I feel like the key concerns here are offensive line, obviously quarterback, right? And then depth in the front 7 or 8 on defense.
Yeah.
But outside of that, I feel like, the skill position talent is always there for Carolina.
Oh, yeah.
They got a lot of skill position guys, very good skill players in the secondary. I just feel like this is one of those years where everything kind of hinges on what Carolina does up front, and that's a very lame, overused term with a lot of schools that we look at, but it really does feel like it's all about the trenches and quarterback. And Carolina, I think, is like the prototypical college football case where if things work out on both sides of the ball in the trenches and a quarterback, this team is going to be pretty good. If it doesn't, then I think we're staring at potential bowl eligibility, maybe worse, even with a favorable schedule.
Yeah. I mean, we always talk about the game evolving and all these elaborate, sets and formations, but it always goes back to those big boys up front, right? And what they can do to create havoc for the quarterback or protect the quarterback. That's what we always go back to. So the schedule is gettable, but you hate to say their biggest game of the year is week 1, but it kind of has that feeling, man, because they play Minnesota, and then you're playing NC Central. Nothing against these programs, but, NC Central, Charlotte, JMU's got a completely new thing going on now with Eddie on. So if you win that first one, fans are going to be excited. If you lose that first one, you really don't have another big game for a few weeks. So it's like, what are we doing? Is it basketball season yet?
You hope it doesn't come to that, just because, what we can get in his schedule now, and pretty good.
Pretty good, man. Pretty gettable.
Pretty good. I I previewed the schedule for Cal and Stanford yesterday. I did the two preview podcasts for two of the incoming ACC schools.
Yeah.
I would not want to play either one of those schedules. Now I'm looking at this schedule for Carolina, and you avoid Clemson. Yes, you have NC State and Florida State. You don't have Notre Dame in the non-con. You aren't facing Virginia Tech that looks pretty good on paper. You're not facing an SMU team with we'll see the group of 5 Power 5 jump. I know recently, like with the Big 12 schools, we've had good group of 5 schools go to the Big 12 and not have a very good first year. But SMU returns a ton of talent off a team that just won the AAC last year. So we'll see about SMU. They look good on paper, right? You don't draw Miami. So look, the schedule I think really comes down to, you mentioned Minnesota on that Thursday night opener here in a couple of weeks. Minnesota, you got to get through the rest of the non-con with teams that have a lot of questions. Charlotte and NC Central, ton of questions. JMU, very talented team last year. Signetti's gone. Bob Chesney's in, but they lose a ton off of that team, so that's a very winnable game. If you get through Minnesota in that opener, is the first tough game. I mean, at Duke is always just a raucous game, but Pittsburgh, Georgia Tech, I think has a chance to be pretty good. So that could be a tough game. But you get that at home. At Florida State's obviously a one-hit circle, but that's not until November. This is a gettable schedule. If UNC figures out quarterback and the trenches, they're going to be able to be in a lot of these games in the first 7 or 8 weeks of the year.
100%. I mean, it's like you said, man. This team can easily start 6-0, 7-0, looking at that schedule. And then you get to Georgia Tech and you throw everything out of the window with what has happened with the Georgia Tech game the last few years. I don't know.
Insane last year.
Yeah. I mean, it's unreal what Georgia Tech does to Carolina in these situations. But before that, looking at the schedule early on, 6-0, 7-0 is gettable, man. And you got to take advantage of it when you have a schedule like this, because schedule luck is a real thing, man. I mean, we could talk about it, in the preseason. We don't really know how these teams are going to look by the time we get to them. But that schedule is there for the taking, and they need to take advantage of it. Outside of Florida State and NC State, you could possibly be favored in the rest of those games. Seriously.
Seriously.
Yeah, I mean, could be, right?
I mean, that's it's no exaggeration. It's really funny because every year Joey and I do this where we talk to the beat writers and we talk to the reporters, and we come out getting maybe a more favorable impression after going through a team for like 40, 50 minutes on a podcast and then we look back on it like halfway through the year and we're like, man, I don't know why we were so high on that team.
Yeah.
But I look at Carolina and like we know where the questions are, and I think the big question here that I'm going to ask you right now is about Mack Brown and his longevity at Carolina and his failure to get the most out of his talent. Because I think, there have been the years where Carolina's been overlooked a little bit, but they've had quarterback kind of figured out. It's been the rest of the roster. Then they've had the years like 2021 where you enter the year as I think they were 10th in the AP poll when they went to Blacksburg.
Yeah, lost the opener. Yeah,
lost the opener to Tech. I'm a Tech alum, so I was there in attendance. I enjoyed that, Rod. I had a good time.
Hey, I bet it was a great atmosphere, man. I mean,
it was crazy.
It was crazy.
They show that ESPN shows that clip, and it's showing the East stands, and it's like right near where I was sitting in that game with my wife and a couple friends. But I mean, I feel like Mack Brown does his best work, like I mentioned, when this team's getting overlooked, and then he's had the teams at Carolina in the second stint where he did this at Texas too, unfortunately, where the team is ranked really high and they underwhelm. I just wonder what the longevity is for Mack Brown, being in his early 70s, looking at how favorable this schedule is. What do you think it would take in like a worst case scenario for North Carolina and Mack Brown to come to an agreement at the end of the year? Like, hey, look, this isn't working out. We're getting negatively recruited against on the trail.
Yeah.
Because everybody reaches that point. I mean, Saban was talking about at Alabama. It happened with Frank Beamer late in his career where teams start to negatively recruit because of your age. We're like, oh, that coach isn't going to be there. what do you think it would take for Carolina and Mack Brown to look at this and be like, hey, this isn't working out. We have to go in a different direction? Or do you think that it's like, hey, look, they have a great year and Mack Brown might walk away anyway because he is the age that he is, and he's talked about being energized and all that, but you have to say that stuff in the media. So I'm curious kind of what your read on that is.
Yeah, I mean, he gets retirement questions all year, right?
Yeah, of course.
He made a good point this summer, though. I mean, he's like, man, once I hang this up, like, what am I going to do? I mean, I love my grandkids. I love hanging out with my family, but this gives me a purpose. So if I'm still, pretty good at this, I don't want to, quit doing it as long as I've got the energy and stuff to do it. But if they don't reach bowl eligibility, then it's going to be in Bubba Cunningham's hands, and he's got to be the bad guy, man, because at some point you have to look in a new direction. But Mack has consistently said, look, I don't want to leave the program in kind of uncertainty. He wants to get it established where you've got, solid footing, recruiting-wise, personnel-wise, and then a steady stream of consistent success, which, props to him, man. 8-9 wins. It was kind of unheard of long-term at Carolina, which is a 500 program in its history. So they've done some good things, but they've won some games they weren't supposed to win. They've lost some games they weren't supposed to lose. And when you finish the seasons the way they have, you got a sour taste in your mouth for half the year because you're waiting to get back on the football field. So it's not a good way to, energize a fan base when you look back and you lose 4 of your last 5 games, and the schedule has not been kind down the stretch. So I think it would have to be a kind of, wheels falling off scenario for him to walk away. And kind of out of his hands with the conversation with Bubba Cunningham. But from the way he's talking, man, I mean, he loves doing this. He loves kind of being that general manager role with delegating and just loving on these kids and getting to know them and trying to make them a success. So he made a good point. Like, if you've done something your whole life and then you just kind of quit, what else is there? I think he said, Bobby Bowden told him a story like, the next significant thing after I'm done coaching is my death if I hang it up. So, I got to keep doing this as long as I've got the energy to do it, and I'm still pretty good at it. So Mack always wins us over, man, because he always says the right things. And he's been pretty successful. So you want to give him a chance as long as you have him to do what he does. But you got to stack wins. I mean, that's the name of the game at the end of the day. If you're not winning, questions are going to rise and people are going to want change.
The greats in the game always have a way to figure out and know when the right time is to walk away.
Yeah.
Mack Brown, it's fine, national champion coach, outstanding career. Nobody's ever going to take anything away from Mack Brown. He's damn good at the college football desk thing at ESPN. Like, he did that for years. Like, he's going to always have kind of opportunities to stay around the game, much like Nick Saban, just because of the type of personality he is. But there is a degree where, like, if you're a coach, you don't know anything else, right? Like Nick Saban talked about that. He's like, well, I don't know what I'm going to do now. And then he got into TV, and you started seeing him, like, pop up on College Game Day last couple seasons. I'm like, yeah, we know what he's angling for. And Tom Brady talked about, well, what am I going to do? And then he's going to be a broadcaster kind of out of nowhere. So these greats in the game always kind of figure out a way to stay involved. I think whether Mack Brown's coaching or not, he'll still be involved in the game one way or another.
Yeah,
and
he still watches film to like 4 a.m., man. He says, like, after games, he's watching film to like 4 a.m. I mean,
still got the energy.
Who does that?
Right. Still got the energy. I mean, no, there are not a lot of coaches in their early 70s still doing that. And
no way. So
and I know Saban and Mack Brown, like, they're both national championship coaches, but obviously one is in a different class than the other. But, like, Nick Saban talking about how it was starting to get hard for him to coach and do things the way that he wanted to. I have a feeling a lot of that wasn't only on the field. It was like, all right, like, the coaching, the long hours recruiting, the game's changing.
Yeah, Mack Brown's all that stuff matters.
And Mack Brown's embraced the recruiting piece of it, with the changing landscape and everything else. He's still really energetic on the recruiting trail, and he's kind of always been that way. And to his credit, like, this 5-year stint's been pretty good. Like you mentioned, that Carolina, they haven't been able to consistently win 8-9 games a year. it was kind of like an aberration under Fedora. They had like a couple good years where they had Marquise Williams and they had Trubisky, and they had a couple of good years, but it was more the aberration than the norm, like when they had that 10-win season almost a decade ago. Now you look at this, and like Max won at least 8 games or more in 3 out of the 5 seasons. He's won 8 or more in 2 out of the last 3. 21 was an obvious disappointment just because of all the talent they had, maybe just a year early with a lot of those guys. But this is a good team, I think, with an opportunity with this schedule. I think the swing games are Pitt, Georgia Tech, Minnesota in the opener, NC State at the end of the year, because NC State's got a pretty good team, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Florida State looks like the only game where I circle. I'm like, that's a really losable game. I think everything else is either very winnable or a toss-up.
Yeah.
And I think because of that, I think Carolina goes 8-4 here.
I mean, it would not surprise me at all.
That's where I'm at. Does it have potential to be better than that? Yeah, but I think on paper, at least going into the year with the questions they have on the offensive line and a quarterback, and then depth in the linebacking core, and you mentioned and there's already an injury there. There are just too many questions for me to go a lot better than that on paper going into the year, but I think the schedule sets up really nice. I think they have an opportunity to win 8 because I think we know enough about Max Johnson to know he's a competent quarterback. Like, he'll be a competent ACC quarterback. I think there's enough there, enough skill position guys. Schedule's really setting up nicely. This is where Mac Brown does his best work. I think 8 wins is realistic. I think they can get a 9th in a bowl game. I think it could be 1 to 2 wins better than that. Would not surprise me at all. Anything less than 7, like if this team goes 6-6, I'd be pretty surprised given the schedule and what they have coming back. That's kind of what would surprise me. That 7 feels like the floor here, but we'll see. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like 7 is the safe number.
Yeah.
But with that schedule, I feel like you got to get 8, man, at least. But there's always a few stinkers in there, even for these, top 10 teams. They go on the road, lose the game. You're like, how the heck did they lose that game? So factoring that in, I think 8-4, 7-5 is your best bet. But looking at that schedule, if you don't reach 7, it's you have a lot of questions after the offseason. The retirement questions are going to keep coming up.
That might be the a 6-6 record with this schedule and what they have coming back, even with the questions at quarterback and on the lines. I feel like that might be what gets the wheels turning for Bubba Cunningham. We'll see. Rod, really appreciate it. Thanks for joining us. Very nice for me to finally meet you. I know we've been messaging trying to get this time set up, so I appreciate the flexibility there. Want to give you the opportunity to plug everything you're doing, all your stuff.
Yeah, man. I mean, we're 3 weeks out now, I guess, or less than 3 weeks.
Yeah. Yep.
Because we got week 0. I always forget about week 0 again.
Yeah.
Yeah, on Twitter at Rodd Baxley. Everything's going to be on FayeObserver.com, Star News. We've got like 6 or 7 papers within the USA Today network. So we'll be cranking out as much as we can between now and the opening games, and should be another fun season, man. Can't wait.
Appreciate it, Rob. We'll have you back on soon, buddy.
Appreciate it, Mike. Thanks, man.
All right, that's Rodd Baxley. We'll be back. Previews still rolling along. Got a few more left. Got the full conference-wide preview. All that good stuff coming. Hit us up on Twitter at BC Podcast ACC. Find us on YouTube, youtube.com/@the-ACC-football-podcast. We'll keep these things posting through the feed all the way up to week 0 with these conference previews. So keep a lookout there everywhere you can find your podcast on audio. We'll talk to you all soon. Until then, go ACC.